All right, we are going to start back this afternoon after our break, and I'm going to quickly introduce Pat Chamberlain here. Pat is a key leader in the Illinois work on developing our new Gateways ESL bilingual credential, as well as a trailblazer in Illinois around efforts to support our many multilingual children and families. And as such, Pat brings very special expertise to her role as a facilitator and connector to our afternoon keynote presentation. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Joni. It is my great, incredible pleasure to introduce Dr. Patricia Kuhl. And her bio is in your handouts and the Dropbox, so I won't go too far into it, but I just want to highlight her role in the Bezos Family Foundation as an endowed chair for early childhood and the co-director of the University of Washington Institute for Learning and Brain Science, and all of her work around the social brain and learning that we're going to get a little taste of today. And all the amazing work that's coming out of the National Academy of Sciences that Dr. Kuhl also has her hand in. She has an amazing influence across the nation. But because we're in Illinois today, I want to do a little Illinois story, right? And it started in 2011. And in 2011, I was contacted to try to support a new program that was trying to do a birth to 5 dual two-way immersion dual language program in 2011. That was not too many people were having that conversation. And so I, as any professor does, right, we just jump right in and we have to go do some research. And who did I find to read right away is Dr. Kuhl. And so I became a groupie at that moment and a follower of her research. And along with Dr. Luisiana Melendez, who also we worked on the credentials together, we started working with a group of faculty to try to build this program. Well, we were a little stuck in terms of getting the faculty to believe that little babies could have bilingual brains. We brought Dr. Kuhl's research to them and showed them what it looked like, and it unstuck us. We were able to move them forward, and 10 years later, they still have one of the earliest two-way dual programs in Illinois, and even other states have come to look at this. So to say that you have had a profound influence in Illinois would be an understatement. And in 2012, I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Kuhl when she was here for the first keynote. And at that time, we had just passed legislation to mandate pre-K dual language for state-funded programs. And so she came and talked to us about the importance of the bilingual brain and with the legislation, and it was groundbreaking work for all of us. And you provided such a solid foundation. And 10 years later, here you are back to help take us to, I don't know where, but I know it's going to be someplace amazing. So thank you, and welcome back to Illinois.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was a lovely introduction. And I'm so excited when people discover the work because, it's the science that's leading us all forward. So, you can't substitute for having real data to tell you what's going on in the mind of the child. And so if you can all see my slides, I'm going to talk today about the mind of the child, what neuroscience is telling us and revealing to us about baby brains, learning, and language. And I'm going to keep saying during this talk that what we're learning about our youngest children and how they learn is actually telling us a lot about how we all learn. There are some lessons here for lifelong learning, and I think that's exciting. So the game changer in our understanding of how children learn is really that the youngest children can now be examined. We can actually look at young babies and understand through behavioral measures how they're learning. And then the tools of modern neuroscience have been applied. So I'm going to be telling you today and showing you, sharing with you data in which we put very little babies in very big machines to understand what's going on inside the brain as children are actually learning, as they're thinking through a problem, as they're looking at something, hearing something, or trying to, problem solve. And so these functional imaging data I'll be able to show you today. And also we're examining the structural. So the first method, the functional imaging, gives you a movie of what is happening in the baby's brain. The magnetic resonance imaging gives you a snapshot. You can see in this second slide, a snapshot of the connections, the wiring diagram for the brain, and gets you to be able to measure particular areas and how the neurons are growing in those areas. And the purpose of doing all this work is to combine the behavioral work with the brain work to understand that first interaction, that complete absorption of parent and child in that bond that will be a kind of gateway to learning. We learn from others. That is the cultural setup that our species is in. We learn from others. And so this social piece of learning is becoming more and more important as we look at cognition. We're beginning to understand what it is that allows children to learn. So let's look at something that most of you have probably seen or heard about. And that is the simple statement that biologists talk about all the time, that there's a critical or sensitive period for the learning of language, and particularly we see it with second language acquisition. So this is a graph in which we plot at the bottom the age at which you're trying to learn a new language. So if you look for your age at the bottom of this graph, and then look on the y-axis, the language score, you can see that it's the highest for the youngest citizens. So from birth to about 7 years of age, the kids are just geniuses. They will absorb a new language automatically, implicitly. We'll talk a little bit about how they're learning. How do they do it? Because we, as you go down this curve, as you get older, every 2 years after the age of 7, you show a pretty sharp decline in your ability to automatically acquire that second language. So while you can take your children to France or Africa and have them acquire the languages spoken there, you yourself will struggle. And so it's kind of interesting that that's how this system works. And so we ask ourselves, what is it that the babies are able to do that we can't do? And so part of the mystery is to understand what mechanisms they're putting to work that allow them to learn so fabulously. And it's possible that there are critical or sensitive periods for other aspects of learning, mathematics, perhaps, certainly for social and emotional learning is heightened in that early period, but we don't understand it as much as we do for the case of language. So if you look at the earliest learning that kids do, the sounds of the language are learned first, and we're going to focus there before the end of the first year, before the baby's first birthday. Babies know what consonants and vowels are used in the language. They hear them better. I'll show you, then they can hear the distinctions in other languages. They start out universal, but by the end of the first year, they master it. And then a little bit later, you see another window of opportunity that opens for words. Around 18 months of age to 24 months of age, kids are learning at a rate of about 10 new words a day. So a kind of window opens up in which words become the most important thing to children. They'll walk around during the day pointing to things and asking you, what's that, what's that, what's that? They want the name of it. They've discovered that things in the world have names. And then finally, when children are between about 3 and it goes on until they're 10, there's a kind of long window in which syntax and grammar are mastered. And so kids are going through these kind of sensitive periods with regard to language in that broader window. They're good from 0 to 7, but there are times in that period where they master particular parts of what we know of as language. So let's look at that first one. How is it that kids come to know that the difference between bat and pat, that B and P, that's significant in our language. If a child can't hear that distinction, there are many words that they wouldn't be able to understand. So about 20 years ago, I started doing tests all over the world. I had a portable device that allowed me to test babies sitting on their parents' lap and seeing whether they could turn their heads when a sound was changed. So I'm going to show you a movie of that procedure. It's called the head turn conditioning. What you'll see is a little baby sitting on her mom's lap. The baby is about 6 months old, and the baby's being distracted by toys on the baby's right. But when the sound changes that's playing in the background, the baby has only about 3 seconds to turn her head towards the sound change from the loudspeaker to see a visual reward. So let me show you how that experiment works.
Can a baby as young as 6 months old hear the difference between two vowels? This baby is trained to look for the toy when the sound changes. She's being distracted, so she'll turn only when she hears the difference in sounds. The key question, will she turn before the toy lights up?
E, 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 E.
Now that baby is a genius, and she clearly knows that she's really, really smart and she's done it right. So in tests that we've done all over the world over the past 20 years, we've tested the sounds of many languages and children who are being raised in these different countries. And the big discovery from all of that work is that at 6 months of age, which is what this little one is, at 6 months of age, babies can hear the distinctions used to convey differences between words in every single language of the world. So we can call them legitimately citizens of the world with regard to language. And the surprise is that the parent sitting behind the child or that assistant wearing the headphones, that assistant can't hear those distinctions unless they're in that person's native language. If you're bilingual, you can hear both the sounds of both languages, but if you are not, you will lose that ability. And we know that when babies turn their heads, they're doing it because the sound has changed, because we run an equal number of change trials where the sound is changed and control trials where it's not changed, and we monitor kids for a head turn. They're not just turning their heads regularly to figure out whether or not the sound, whether the little animal will dance in the black box. They're really turning their heads because they hear the sound change. So the next question you should ask, and what scientists ask, is, well, if they're citizens of the world at birth until 6 months, and you and I as adults are language-bound listeners, we're no longer citizens of the world, we can't hear those distinctions, when do the babies become like us? And the answer across many experiments that we conducted across many countries, and here's one of them, is that they change before the child's first birthday. So what we see here is a performance on the head turn task for discrimination of 2 syllables important to English, ra and la, and not important to Japanese. And we're testing here in Seattle, American babies, and we're testing in Tokyo. We went to Tokyo with our apparatus and tested Japanese babies. So Japanese babies are not going to learn words that differ in R and L, and all their lives, adult Japanese people have trouble hearing and producing the difference between R and L. But you can see that in babyhood, from 6 to 8 months, they're just as good as the American kids. So we all start out equal as these citizens of the world. And then 2 months later, the American kids are getting better at this distinction, and the Japanese kids are getting worse. And what's interesting is that they're both groups are doing exactly what they have to do to learn English words as opposed to Japanese words. It's important that Japanese children ignore that distinction to be able to learn Japanese. So there's something magical about this window here from 8 to 10 months when our little citizens of the world start to become culture-bound listeners like we are. And so again, as a scientist, you want to know, well, what's going on during that 2-month period? What's happening? What are they doing to learn? And if you're just a regular mortal walking around looking at infants, you wouldn't know that they've made this change between 8 and 10 months, because without the experiments, there would be no way to ascertain that this change in perception, the baby's perception is kind of narrowed to the set of sounds that are really important for the language that they're going to learn. So one of the things that we did to understand a little bit about how we could measure this, not only in behavior, but in the brain, we started doing experiments with event-related potential. So the baby's wearing an EEG cap, And the cap has these little sensors, little electrodes that are harmless to the baby, but recording brain waves as the baby listens. So the same kind of presentation, rah, 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 and then an occasional la, or ah, 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 and occasional e comes up, and we're looking to see the change in the brain. So when the baby's wearing the cap and listening to the sounds, the standard sounds are these background sounds, and the deviant sound is that new one, the odd one that comes up. And you can see by looking at the brain waves that when the deviant sound, the new sound, is presented, the brain immediately within 250, 300 milliseconds, that's a third of a second, the baby brain recognizes that something has happened. It's changed. And so we could understand that both the behavioral measure of turning your head and this brain measure where the baby just has to wear a cap, then there's no head turning going on. The baby wears a cap, and we can measure the brain's detection of this difference. Well, it just turns out that the brain's ability to detect this difference is so important that this measure of a native language sound discrimination predicts language to the age of 30 months and reading readiness at the age of 5. And we've just last month published a brand new study showing it not only does that, it predicts at age 6 how good children's understanding of syntax is in production and perception, and which of the children might be at risk for a speech language disorder. So this early change that happens between 8 and 10 months in a typical baby's developmental life has this long-term reach to predict how they're going to come out with regard to language skills. So it's something we want to pay attention to and we want to understand. We want to think, well, what is happening during that blue period, that sensitive period from 8 to 10 months? And so we started to ask a new set of questions to target what kind of learning could be going on. And we did a lot of work to show that babies and children, all of us really are kind of statistical learners, meaning we are listening to and looking at what's happening in the environment, and the frequency with which things happen makes an impression on our brains. That babies pay attention to the sounds that happen most often in their language. So part of the reason that American babies get better at R and L discrimination and Japanese babies get worse is that both of those sets of infants are listening to a distributional frequency of sounds that differs, and babies' brains are sensitive to distributional statistics. So that's interesting. What we then, once we discovered that, we asked this question: what if we expose infants to a brand new language during the sensitive period? Are they going to be able to learn? Let's say they've been learning English their entire lives, and all of a sudden at 9 months, we expose them to Mandarin Chinese. What would happen? Are they going to be able to discriminate those sounds coming from Chinese? And if perception changes based on that experience, what happens to production? Do they start babbling differently? Or what is happening as we expose babies to a new language? So as background to that experiment, here's data that we recorded in Taipei, Taiwan, and again in Seattle. And here we're testing the perception of a Mandarin Chinese contrast. Now, so this is not ra la anymore. This is with the head turn technique. This is chi chi. And for me, they sound identical. I cannot hear the difference. But of course, all my graduate students and postdocs who are native speakers of Mandarin tell me I'm not trying hard enough and I ought to be able to hear that distinction. But of course I can't. But look at what the babies in Taiwan do. So when you test in Seattle and Taipei, 6 to 8 months, the kids are equally good at hearing the change from chi to chi. And then 2 months later, it's the Taiwanese babies getting a lot better and the American babies getting a lot worse. Again, each of those groups of babies are doing exactly what they need to do to learn the words of their respective languages. So here now, we're going to do something different. We're going to do an intervention that it consists of 12 sessions, 25 minutes each. And we're going to have American babies listen to 4 different Mandarin Chinese speakers whose native language is Mandarin Chinese. And they're going to hear a lot, 12 sessions over that 12, it's about a 5-week period, 12 sessions over that 5-week period. They hear about 33,000 syllables. So it's quite a bit of exposure. And our question is going to be, if we let them listen to this new language at that particular time in development, what does that do? to their perception? What does it do to the brain? And so I want to have you listen to and look at what these 12 sessions look like. So here's a Mandarin speaker giving the experience of Mandarin Chinese to one of the babies in one of the sessions. It's kind of like imagining having Mandarin Chinese relatives, and they move to your house and stay with you for 4 or 5 weeks. And, 3 times a week, they sit down on the rug with the baby, your baby, and they speak only Mandarin to the baby. And we're asking, what does that experience do to the brain? So here's what one of those sessions looked like.
Jasper， 早安 Finn， 嗨，我们要来讲一个故事哦。今天要讲的故事是《小熊七七探险记》，来看看发生了什么事情哦。小熊七七在这里，一个绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈。绿色的圈圈，转一下，转一圈，嘿，一圈，再一次哦，转1、2、3。
Okay, so I mean, I don't think that changed your perception of Mandarin Chinese. What did it do to the little babies' brains? Did they learn or not? So here's our original plot of American infants and Taiwanese infants on this Chinese contrast. And we're going to ask, what happened to the control group? Now, we had to have a control group that didn't hear any Mandarin to know whether or not just coming into the lab made them better at Mandarin Chinese discrimination. And so here's our control group exposed only to English, didn't get any exposure to Mandarin. And of course, they don't get any better after 12 sessions of listening to more English. It doesn't do anything to improve their Mandarin. And then we had a group of babies, as I said, exposed to the Mandarin for 12 sessions over that 5-week period. Look what happened to them. That small bit of experience made them statistically equivalent to the babies in Taiwan who'd been listening to Mandarin Chinese for 10.5 months by that time. And so in a sense, it does not take much exposure when you give the brain exactly what it is waiting for at that particular moment in time. Learning is absolutely miraculous. It's just amazing that they were statistically equivalent. So we then found ourselves asking one more question. How important was the speaker? How important was the human being? If you believe that babies are taking statistics, and the experiments had shown that just listening could change simple perception of syllables, the question then becomes, what if we exposed babies to this Mandarin Chinese over a television set? I mean, when we ran this experiment, it was a time when many companies were trying to sell videos and audio tapes of people speaking foreign languages in hopes that children would learn them. So we brought a new group of children into the lab. We had beautiful DVD recordings of the natural experience of watching and listening to the Mandarin speakers. We put that on DVDs and did the experiment all over again. Babies again in that same room, their parents are sitting behind them. They're getting the same dosage of 12 sessions. And the question is, what does that audio video experience, that AV experience do? And we contrasted that with a audio only, where the screen showed a teddy bear and the babies were just listening. And the graduate students were making predictions, taking bets about what would happen. And they said, oh, those babies are paying so close attention to the video, makes it so simple. There's not, nothing distracting. They're just focusing on that video. I think they're going to learn in the video only, the AV condition, and not in audio only. Well, what happened? So here's our previous graph. Let's add to it the audio only condition. No learning in that condition. So audio only, when they're looking at the bear, had absolutely no effect on their ability to discriminate Mandarin Chinese sounds. And the TV condition, video, beautiful video, kids stared at it, they crawled up to it, they looked intently at it, but they learned nothing. So we were able to conclude that the social brain, it's that social interaction that's having a huge effect on the baby's ability to learn. And when you put that same material on a video screen, while they will look at that video screen intently, for all the world you think they're learning, they are not learning. And so the lesson here is that there's something special, at least for little ones, but I think we can spend some time later talking about, is this social interaction only restricted to babies, or is there something about learning that really needs to be linked or is enhanced by social exposure? And I think the latter. We have experiments now that really do show that social exposure provides new information because you can look at what the tutor is looking at. The babies follow the gaze of the tutor. And I'll show you an experiment suggesting that the mere presence of other human beings while we learn is an enhancement to learning. Well, we did another experiment. We didn't want to stop with Mandarin Chinese. I want to show you a little clip from the next experiment we ran, in which we exposed babies for the 12 sessions, exact same design, but now it's to Spanish. We want to make sure that it isn't just Mandarin Chinese, that babies can learn the sounds of Spanish. And also we tested the words of Spanish. Can they exposure to 12 sessions teach them words as well? And we used a fancy camera setup. So you're going to see 4 different angles of Diego, who is one of our Spanish tutors, talking to the baby. So let's look at that clip. Let's see, let me play this one.
Te da un besito. Besito. Porque te quiere, ¿no? Con la boca, te da un besito. Qué rico es el pan. Muchas gracias, Lucas. Mía. 2, 3. Hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Estás bien, Spencer? ¿Te gusta el pan? ¡Qué rico!
Okay, so you can tell that the babies are pretty engaged. They're doing some babbling themselves, and they're behaving as though this is a very, very interesting and stimulating experience for them. So the study's results were the same with regard to the sounds. Prior to the exposure, babies could not, American learning babies could not discriminate the Spanish contrast, but like the ones that are common to Spanish, but not included in English. But after this 12 session experience between 9 and 10 months, the babies were discriminating the Spanish sounds that are critical to words. Not only that, we showed that we had an experimental set of 10 words that were used during these 12 sessions and 10 other words that were never used. These are all Spanish words. And after exposure, we tested both recognition. These are brain tests. You're looking for the neural signatures of word recognition and sound change recognition. And we showed that the kids in the intervention group could hear those distinctions after exposure. So they showed the neural signatures to the Spanish words. So it's not only the sounds of the language right at this time in development, but it's the words. And it was very exciting to extend this to Spanish. So what we then did was let the babies go home after this experiment is done. So now they're at about 11 months of age, and we bring them back in at 12.
Te da un besito.
The next one here. We bring them back in at 12 months, and we ask whether or not anything's changed with regard to their production of speech. So now we're not exposing them to any new language systematically. We're just having them play with someone, but the person they're playing with either speaks English or speaks Spanish. And what we're doing is recording the baby's utterances, and they play for about 30 minutes. And we ask whether or not they babble differently. Do they use their vocalizations differently under those 2 conditions? And we just published this year, 2020, we show that babies exposed for just 12 sessions are babbling differentially. So they have flexible production. It's like they're on the path to being a bilingual. Even with this small experience, they're already moving in the direction of being a bilingual. We've changed perception, we've changed production. And we showed that this wasn't true for kids who were just brought into the lab for the first time at 11 months and playing with a Spanish versus English speaker. It did require the experience of the 12 sessions. We also brought in bilingual babies who from birth had been listened to Spanish and English. And of course, they also babble flexibly. So what's happening is that during this magical window of opportunity early in development, a small bit of exposure does have an effect both on perception and production. What we don't know is how long it lasts. I mean, it wouldn't last forever. We did bring a small set of these children back in at 14 months, and we could show that the signatures of learning were still there, measurable in the baby brain at 14 months. But it was diminished, and I think we would sensibly think that without the future exposure, these kids wouldn't continue on the path of picking up Spanish. They would, but they might, if they were exposed systematically to Spanish in the natural world, they'd be ahead of kids who didn't have our exposure experiment. So it answered a puzzle with regard to what can you do with these learning windows of opportunity if you have this kind of socially rich learning session. Another question that we asked is that why didn't kids learn from television? Why is it that the babies don't learn from television? And we learned a couple of things. I mentioned that we analyzed babies' eye movements, and during the natural social exposures, babies' eye movements are tracking the tutor's eye movements. So when she looks at the toy and names it, the babies are looking from her and to the toy. And so the more babies have that social skill of eye gaze following, which is important for all of us, all our lives, we always pay attention to what other people are looking at. When babies do it, they pick up more in these natural settings. But in the TV condition, you can't really track eye movements to the same degree. It's all, the spatial array and the size of it doesn't allow that kind of eye tracking to happen so readily. And then secondly, we ran a very interesting experiment in which we tested babies turning on the screen, trying to bring their attention to the screen. Here you see a baby who is increasing her attention to the screen by actually pressing it to turn it on. And we were wondering whether or not that alone would improve the brain signature of learning. So after 20 seconds, it goes off and she has to press it again. And all of the kids show that they're capable of doing that. But our question was more than can they press the screen and does that improve learning? We wanted to know the answer to a different question with regard to whether learners would learn better if they were paired with other infants. So we randomly assigned babies to either the single baby learning, learning solo, or learning when paired with others. And the stunning result of this experiment shows that infants learn twice as well when they're learning with another baby. And it isn't that they learn best when all 12 sessions are with the same other baby. It's not. My first hypothesis was that getting to know their learning partner might be they'd help each other press the screen or they'd be excited to learn together. It turns out just the opposite. The more novel babies, let's say the target baby was this baby in the red pants, the more novel the learning partners were. So babies who learned with 5 or 6 different babies had sessions, of the 12 sessions, they had 5 or 6 different babies occurring in those learning sessions. They learned the most. There's a systematic relationship between the novelty of learning partners and your brain signatures of learning. So what are the lessons here? First, that learning together, co-learning, even when it's from a screen, makes a difference, not because we're teaching each other necessarily, just the mere presence of another baby has something to do with a neural excitation that increases learning. And when your partners are more novel, you will learn even more. So extending that to the pandemic, the idea that we had our children, and still do, many of us have our children at home learning solo from screens, it's got to be the worst condition ever. We're showing, like that baby on the left, not really moving the needle by pressing the screen if they're learning alone. So learning with others is a good thing, and learning with novel others, that our brains evolved to pay attention to novel social partners. Like maybe they can offer something new. Maybe what they do is going to be exciting and you should pay attention to it. And so I think that the lessons here can be conveyed to school-age children. I think we should think about it with regard to our teens. Our teens have suffered greatly from the pandemic. Their reports are that their disinterested parents are saying can't get them to attend. Learning in pairs is good for human beings. So this brings, what is it now? Let's see. Wait a second. Can you hear me? Hopefully. I got a signal that I was muted, so I'm hoping that I am not muted and I am audible.
Hear you just
hear you.
fine. We can hear you.
Okay, great. It was just something flashed on my screen. Anyway, so here we are. Why does a scientist like me invest in a $2.5 million machine, magnetoencephalography, or MEG for short, to put a little brain inside? Well, first of all, it's totally safe and non-invasive. This is not anything that it's a quiet machine. I'll show you a video in a moment where it's on. So it's completely silent, non-invasive, and it's only acting like a stethoscope for the brain. We're just listening to the brain. And the answer really is, I want to know what's going on inside. I want to know how it is that language gets excited, how the social brain plays a role. And the only way that you can do that is to get under the hood, to really look at the baby brain. And so we were the first in the world. Here's our 6-monther, one of them, in a MEG machine. The machine is on. She's listening through insert earphones. So I wanted you to see that there's no noise from this machine, no banging, clanging. It's a novel technology, MEG, not like an MRI that is noisy. And so here she is. She's listening to the sounds of different languages. We entertain her with various things, so she has something to look at, but she's free to move. This is a tour de force technologically, because with the cap she's wearing, we're tracking her little head movements. So she's free to move. But that means we always know where the structures of the brain are. We know where parts of her brain that we care about, well, where are they? Because we've got the cap to help us track. So what do we see when we look inside? So let's go to the next slide. Let's see, I'm just going to play a little bit more. So you can see she's a happy camper. She's having no issues. So here's one of our 12-monthers. So that's a monolingual baby. So this baby's already committed, in a sense, to English. So that's the brain, color-coded by many areas. Here's auditory cortex. We want to watch that as she listens. And Broca's area is the area you produce sound with. So how is she going to produce words and talk back? You need Broca's. And then that white part is the arcuate that connects the two. Now you can see the activity in the redness. That is the level of activity as the baby's listening to a background sound. And now we have a new sound, and you can see the auditory area just lights up like crazy, but so is Broca's area. And the main finding of this study is that when babies listen to speech, it isn't only their auditory cortex that lights up, which is of course what we expected, but even before they can talk, the Broca's area that they need to talk back is already partnering, like rehearsing, trying to rehearse and understand, what will it take for me to reply? How do I join this social game? How do I become a partner in the conversation? And so we think this response, Broca's area, is important for reading. It's important for analyzing language. It's important for motor movements and planning. So the idea that even as young as 6 months, we saw that Broca's area was active when you listen to speech. And in fact, a doctoral student, Maggie Clark, is now proving that same point in 2-monthers. So that social response, that social need to talk back, is there very, very early in development. And so we kind of understand that the brain needs to be talked to. When you're talking to a baby, you're not only activating auditory cortex, you're activating the centers that will allow the child to talk back. So no wonder language input is so important. And no wonder what we're training kids to do is join the conversational game. Talk to me, and the baby's brain is starting to talk back. So one of the signals we've been following for years is what's called Parentese or Motherese across many, many cultures. And what you see here at the top record and the bottom record, the top record is labeled AD, that's adult directed speech. Like I'm talking to you, I'm using adult directed speech, and it's not boring, I hope, but it doesn't change as much in pitch as it would if I were holding a 2-monther and I suddenly turn to my 2-monther. You'd be seeing something more like the bottom, where we have an infant directed or ID speech, and the mother says, Can you say ah? Say ah. Hey, you, say hi. I mean, she goes up to 700 hertz. I mean, it's astounding that these pitch changes are so automatic and natural. We've recorded this kind of parentese, because mothers, fathers, grandparents, even older siblings do it, a kind of parentese speech and standard speech, which adult directed is standard speech, all over the world. And it's virtually universal in the world's languages. But more importantly, it looks like it plays a role in development. So in one set of studies that my students did, they put these little recorders, the Lena recorders, on children at 11 months at home. And the recorders for 4 days recorded everything that the baby heard. And the computer analyzes how much speech is there, who's talking, an adult, an infant, how much back and forth is there, how many conversational turns. And what we showed is that the more the parents happened, we didn't give them any instructions, the more they happened to use Parentese at 11 months, the more words they produced at 24 months. And you can see on the left where each family is represented by a dot. That's a pretty good and strong and significant relationship. Whereas standard speech on the right, so what I'm doing right now, it looks like it's a negative, but it's not. It's simply not significant. It's neutral. So, you know, standard speech doesn't boost. It is not associated with. This isn't causal. We can't say it's causal. We have additional experiments that get at that coming up next. But in this one, we could link it. So more Parentese at home, more words produced at 24 months. So then we turned, another student turned to a randomized control trial where we actually try to coach the parents. We tell them about the importance of language. We tell a language input. We tell them about the brain. We tell them about Parentese. And we randomly assign them to a coaching group where they come in at 6, 10, 14, and 18 months. And we let them listen to recordings of themselves and their children made at home. So they kind of know, what is Parentese when I produce it? And is that good for the baby or not? We tell them that's the point of the study. We're trying to see whether it is or not. The control group gets all the recordings, but doesn't get the coaching. And so we're looking at the effect of trying to coach parents, asking, well, does it really increase their Parentese? And then what does that do to language development? So what you see plotted here is the amount of Parentese in the experimental group, the intervention group in red, and the blue group, the control group in blue. And the two graphs at 6 months, that is not statistically different, even though the intervention group was a little lower in the use of Parentese to begin with, but it's not statistically significant. But as you get to 10 and 14 months, and particularly at 18 months, what we've done is put parents on a different trajectory. They're using a lot of Parentese at home, and quite naturally, I mean, they're only seeing us once every 4 months. We're not telling them what to do, but we're telling them that if they do use Parentese, our studies suggest that their kids' language skills may get better. And so it looks from this graph that we've actually, created an increase in the experimental group in the use of Parentese. Well, look what it does to conversational turns. So at 6 months, the conversational turn, so that's when parent and child, whether they're babbling or producing words, just responding to each other. And so we counted how many times that's happening in a 12-hour day. And at 6 months, the two groups don't differ. 10 months, they're getting further apart, but still not significant. At 14 months, it is significant. At 18 months, it's hugely significant. So what this Parentese and engagement of the baby seems to do is get the child to engage, turn, take, back and forth. Remember, we're stimulating Broca's area when we talk to babies. So as soon as they can begin to control vocalizations, they want to talk back, whether it's babbling or eventually word production. And so finally, we know we've increased the Parentese. We know we've increased the conversational turn rate. And then finally, we know that if you assess a language at each of these ages, what we see is a huge difference in the child's ability, their word vocalizations over a 12-hour day by the time they get to 12, by the time they get to 18 months. And so you've put parents on this trajectory that truly changes what it is that they're doing with their kids at home. And so let's go on to a new study. Again, this is something we did during the pandemic when we were able to take these data and look at brain measures. We had taken brain measures at 26 months. And these are not functional, this is structural. So when you take pictures of the baby brain, you can see how the fiber tracts are growing. And the fiber tract that you saw on the movie of the functional recording using MEG brain imaging, that arcuate is here in red. The arcuate connects the listening area of the brain to the speaking area of the brain. And you look on the left and we can see that at 14 months, these conversational turns that babies take are strongly related to myelin in that arcuate, meaning myelin is a kind of white substance that covers the neurons and makes electrical information travel more quickly. And so in the left hemisphere, which you see in the middle panel here, in the babies who are taking a lot of conversational turns with their parents, you can see that their arcuate is getting stronger and stronger. So this activity of talking to babies and getting them, engaging them socially, getting them to talk back is building the connections that will allow all of this to just get better and easier over time. And so basically, language input can be shown to build the brain both functionally and structurally. So let's move now to the idea that Pat raised in the introduction, and that is that even our exposure to a foreign language for just 12 sessions makes the baby brain begin to learn a second language. What happens if we try to develop an intervention that would bring bilingual learning to the public? How could we do this? Well, we invented, based on our research, we invented a method and a curriculum to teach in infant education centers. We thought of this as doing something we could do around the world. We ended up going to Madrid, Spain, with this intervention because Spain, and particularly Madrid, has 6 million babies between 0 and 3 in neighborhood infant education centers. They're free to parents. In all neighborhoods, you have the poor neighborhoods, you have very wealthy neighborhoods, everyone pays only what they can afford. And so in the migrant worker neighborhoods, parents don't have to pay anything. Children come at 9, they leave at 4, they get fed beautiful meals. And so we decided to try to put all of our knowledge to work about language input and social interaction and listening to native speakers and playful learning, social learning into an 1 hour a day intervention that we took to Madrid. And so we used the juniors at the University of Washington who wanted to go abroad for a year. So juniors went abroad for a year and they became the tutors in the early education centers. And so here you see a little classroom where we've got toddlers, and you see the guy in blue, he's one of our tutors wearing a Seahawks 12 t-shirt and playing and interacting with the babies and speaking only Spanish. So this is speaking only English. This is a Spanish learning set of babies. Parents don't speak English at home. The school doesn't speak English at all. The teachers at the school, nor the superintendent, nor the director speak English. And so for the first time, for an hour a day for 18 weeks, these kids are listening to the American students speak English and play games. So these were reading activities, playful activities that would engage the kids and definitely get them to talk back. All the games had to do with having the kids, whether they were babbling or whether they were at a word stage. These were from 7 months to 3 years of age, getting them to play the game by answering back. And so our question was, how can they learn enough in an hour a day for 18 hours, 18 weeks? And then we had control kids in the same schools who didn't take these intervention classrooms, but they were also recorded with learner devices every 2 weeks, and they took the standardized tests in the beginning and the end. So the bottom line is these language sessions for the intervention group produced amazing learning. kids who were in the intervention group, so in the middle graph, experimentally in the dark bar, the controls in the light bar, you can see at the start of the intervention, they're the same, but after 18 weeks, the kids in the intervention group are significantly better. And on the far right, you see their English vocalizations. And the 4 groups of which are separated by age from 7 months to the close to 3-year-olds, they are producing up to 10 times more utterances that are English in nature, meaning even if they're babbling, you can, are they producing English syllables or Spanish syllables? And we can see that the outcomes were simply amazing. So our little bilingual graduates were celebrated in a very special ceremony we had there. And in this, so this was our first outcome published in 2017. And we've gone back since then to go to even poorer neighborhoods, to 13 schools, some of them in very poor migrant neighborhoods where the parents could not read. And they had to sign our human subjects forms with an X after the directors would explain to them what we were planning to do. So you can imagine these little tykes who had not had, they'd had language experience, but no formal reading, and also growing up in pretty poverty-stricken conditions. And so we were eager to see in our second experiments, which have been published now in 2020, that the kids in the most poverty-stricken schools actually learned the fastest. We, in these last studies that we published in 2020, we compared 18-week learning with 32-week learning. So the half of the year or the whole year. And for the kids in the poorest schools, that first 18 weeks, their trajectory of learning, if you measure it every 2 weeks, is faster, significantly faster than the kids from wealthier neighborhoods. And then they level off. They still stay a little bit ahead of the kids who are from wealthier neighborhoods, but the wealthier neighborhoods in the second half of the school year catch up. I think it's extraordinary that kids who have not had as much opportunity to learn, I mean, the brain is all about opportunities to learn. And so giving kids opportunities is what is the game changer, and certainly was for these kids in the migrant neighborhoods of Madrid, Spain. So let's go on to what we're doing more recently. I've mentioned how important I think face-to-face social interaction is for young babies. I just want to point out that we're doing some really interesting experiments now where baby's in a MEG machine and the mom is in an EEG cap, and we're monitoring both brains to measure interbrain synchrony. So it turns out that if you have mom interacting socially with the baby and then occasionally turning away to talk to someone else or punch on her cell phone, that you can measure what the brain, the baby brain, responds to social interaction as opposed to its absence. Like if the mother turns and doesn't respond to the child, what happens to the brain? So we've found an area, a kind of social area of the brain that when the mother is attending is just incredible and produces a very strong reaction in the baby brain. And when the mother turns away, this area stops firing. And it looks like from our follow-up language measures that this early social positive interaction in that particular area, both on the left and on the right, inferior frontal, is highly predictive of future language. So I think it just brings in alignment the power of the social brain. So I want to do one last intervention that I think is very, very exciting, and that is to show you that baby brains benefit from the exposure to music. So a lot of infants listen to music, but we have not had measures of whether or not it makes a difference to their ability to hear differences in music or to language. So Christina Zhao, a student in the lab who was herself a concert pianist before becoming a neuroscientist, she's in the pink shirt there. She did exactly what we did for language exposure, but using music instead. The kids come in at the same time in development at about 9 months, and they have 12 sessions from that 9 to 10 and a half month period in which they're listening to music. And so we have them listen to the rhythm. We're focusing on rhythm as opposed to pitch, and they hear the waltz, which for those of you who know music, it has that kind of bump, 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 bump. It has a tempo, a triple meter tempo that is unique to the waltz. And so kids heard many variations during their social sessions, and they're playing and they're pounding out the rhythm with their parents' help on the drums, and they get a chance to look at each other and see them all doing it. And the control group, so again, this is a randomized control. The control group is playing with the same toys with their parents in a social group, but they're not getting exposed to the music. And so it's a social environment. There's 12 sessions over that month's time. And then we do brain tests. Again, the babies are in MEG afterwards, so we can see what the effect is. So what did these sessions look like? I'll give you a little snippet of one of those sessions. And of course, we're tracking language development up to the age of 30 months.
Me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd.
Okay, so you can see that it's highly social. They look at each other, they stare back and forth, and they're pretty actively engaged in that tapping. So we're looking at the effect of not only listening, but tapping that rhythm. And that's part of most music classes for infants. And so the end result of this study was pretty surprising. When the babies got into the MEG machine, so all the kids, control and experimental, after the experiment is done, they have their MEG session, and we're testing how good they are at detecting a mistake in the rhythm of the waltz with just pure tones. So they're hearing beep, 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 but then sometimes it goes beep, 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 like it's mistimed. And we're saying, do the kids who were exposed to that rhythm, do they get better at it? And so we expected that, yes, they would. But we also asked, well, is there anything about this experience that transfers to speech, like rhythms in speech? So we let them listen to a Japanese contrast that uses rhythm to make a difference in the phoneme. And again, the kids were better in auditory cortex at reacting to that mistake. When they heard it change from what it is typically to a delayed occurrence of that extra syllable, they detected it better than kids in the control group. But an even more interesting finding was that the prefrontal cortex, the area, not auditory cortex, but prefrontal, where patterns are detected and attention is directed, kids in the experimental group were much better. And so I think what we were doing as we exposed babies to the regular experience of a rhythm is not only to tune them into music, but tune them into patterns. And the reason we get the effect for both music and speech is that both music and speech, and a lot of everything we do in the world, visually and otherwise, is dependent on our ability to detect patterns. What we created is kids who were better at detecting patterns. And we're following up on this to see whether or not music experience makes better executive function kids, meaning that executive function has to do with attending to patterns and then changing your focus of attention when it's appropriate, to inhibit attention changes and to execute attention changes. And executive function skills are really important to school. And I think another reason that music is interesting is that one of the reasons that early childhood is so potent for the brain is that you're giving babies regular experiences, games like pat a cake or peekaboo. They all have a kind of rhythmic patterning to them that results in something, the peekaboo at the end, and kids show great anticipation, looking forward to peekaboo. And so kids growing up, and that seems like it would be good for the brain. Kids growing up in abject poverty where stress is high and the world is chaotic aren't experiencing as many patterns. The patterns are less available because life is more chaotic, not as regular, not as predictable, not as pattern driven. And it could be that exposure to a regular set of games and kind of entertaining interactions, social interactions we have with children could, greatly benefit their brain's prefrontal cortex and assist executive function. So we're following up on all of these tests to see whether or not something like music intervention, which is fun, unfortunately being taken away from our schools these days, but that music and, kind of the arts, what can the arts offer to science? It's possible that music plays a real role, and it has always in cultures with dance and rhythm and bringing societies together, people together, that it plays a role in joining us in a common pattern, which could be good for social emotional learning. So let me go to conclusions. There are definitely sensitive periods in early language development. And during these periods, learning is amazing. It happens, it looks like magic. And it's deeply affected during those periods by social interaction. And during this early period of development, language input in the form of this Parentese, which is kind of musical, like in the high pitch and very engaging pitch contours, it does appear to assist language development. We've now moved from association studies to the parent coaching, which actually has a randomized control that gets us closer to proving that it works that way. And we've got some evidence in the brain that there's sensory motor learning going on. These conversational turns give children a chance to join the conversation, to use their not only sensory skills, but their motor skills, and that link between listening and talking to begin the dance that is conversation begins so early in infancy and actually results in brain changes in the pathways that connect listening and speaking. Social experience gates linguistic development. I don't mind calling the social brain the kind of gatekeeper of cognition. It's much more important than we've thought before. Social interaction, as we've learned during the pandemic, is something we thrive on, and when it's absent, it's difficult. Infant language learning may reveal how humans learn across domains. So I focused on language, but you can imagine that other domains might show the similar effects. And then finally, there are implications for education, that early learning really does make a difference. The social brain matters. These are the kinds of things that if we took it into account seriously, then protecting our little ones and giving them the opportunity for early education, and we're hoping that the Biden administration is moving in that way. It appears that they are. I think the science has made a big difference in the willingness of people to entertain the idea that the way to revolutionize education in the United States is to pay more attention to early childhood learning. So with that, I thank you very much for listening, and I thank my lab group and collaborators. You can see there are hundreds of people who it takes to run studies like this, and it takes huge support. So I thank both my collaborators, students, and postdocs, as well as the financial support from all of these organizations that you can see. So with that, I'll stop sharing and we'll go to the question and answer period.
Oh my goodness, there's a lot in there. That was like a little mini graduate seminar, wasn't it?
It was actually. Yes.
So we know we could keep you on for hours and hours, but we won't. So I'll toss some questions at you, and we'll see how far we get before we will be done at 3 o'clock. All right.
All right.
Several of the questions that came in related to sort of our current reality related to COVID and the virtual learning and screen time, and what the implications of your research might be related to screen time for young children, and even telehealth and teletherapy and those kinds of things.
Right. I think the pandemic has changed us hugely and maybe forever. And there's a lot of lessons in it. I first have to say, thank goodness there is Zoom. Thank goodness there is some opportunity to keep the learning going, because if you can imagine, what would we all have done with no ability to communicate with each other during this pandemic? What would the students, the primary and secondary and college students, have done without any opportunity? So kudos to the ability to communicate. So that's the good news. The bad news is that a lot of children and a lot of adults are suffering greatly and have not been able to learn or to communicate well. I have myself students and postdocs who have not done well during this pandemic and have not been able to get themselves to be engaged without that stimulus of other students, of the teachers, their guidance, their mentors. Some have fallen apart. And I know from my own neighborhood that the teens are suffering greatly when sports were removed, et cetera, et cetera. This has not been a good time for many of us. Now, there are some lessons. I think first we have to value, that just admit what's true. We have to value more than ever before what it really means to have social interaction with other people. It isn't just our social emotional selves, though that's terribly important, but it is our ability to communicate, to really share our thoughts, to really share our feelings, to really learn that social piece. And if you take the science seriously, why is it so valuable? Because we watch each other. You can see we're so exquisitely sensitive to movements of the body and the face, frowning, smiling, shoulders hunched, shoulders up. We're so aware of what the other person's kind of stance is, but it's much harder on Zoom or on any video to pick that stuff up. So we take cues from one another that are exquisitely sensitive, but highlighted by face-to-face. And then secondly, the studies on the infants, and I think it's true of all school children, that just having someone sit beside you to learn, the mere presence of another child, and yes, a mentor too, some of the studies show, another person does something to increase the thresholds of learning. So we've got a direct connection between novelty of partners and neural evidence of learning. It's pretty shocking. And so what we should take from this is that we need to try to make learning as social as possible. If we're learning from screens, try to learn with others, try to put the kids together, try to have bubble families who can be with one another, that they've either been in a bubble during the pandemic, that putting two school-age children together to try to learn, it looks like it would be a good bet. And for ourselves and others, I would say be very aware of the power of social, and then attempt to make your screen time, as social as possible. And I think in general, I am willing to tell parents with children under the age of 2 that I'm with the pediatricians in telling them to pretty much stay away from screen time, from tablets and all of the other things, because studies that I haven't done, but I know the people who have done them, established that under the age of 16 months, for every additional hour, this was before the pandemic, every additional hour of TV watching was associated with 5 fewer words that the children knew under 16 months.
Oh my.
Yeah, I mean, that's shocking. Screen time takes the place of something else. If you plop, occasionally you're fine. If you plop a baby in a high chair in front of a TV for appreciable periods of time under 16 months, they're losing you time and they're losing words. And so I wouldn't do it. And beyond that, I think that beyond the age of 2, kids do recognize that that person on the screen has some reality, and potentially that comes from Skype calls with grandma and things like that. I think that it changes after symbolic reasoning allows kids to understand that that's a person there. But this kind of mindless sitting back to watch a moving video, like the babies who crawled up to the TV screen, they looked at it, some of them touched it, but it was not doing anything to their brains to induce learning. They were, I guess, watching the dancing lights. They're visually entertained, but they didn't learn. So I think we have run an experiment this year that we didn't want to run. We were all locked in our homes, our kids, we don't yet know the full impact of it. We won't know till we're back. till we're back and we deal with the mental health issues, till our kids are back in school and we see, can they pick up? Are they okay? What have they lost? Have they gleaned anything? If you're had a third grader, did they glean anything about, the math tables from Zoom, remote education? We won't know. So it's going to be a wild ride. That's my prediction. We're going to learn a lot. We didn't do anything. We didn't bring this on to ourselves. And there we are.
Well, here's to continuous learning.
Exactly.
One of the things that you just mentioned when we're talking about children and socialization and their brain, the way the brains work, it made me think about what you found with parents in the socialization with coaching. And
Yes.
is that the same thing going on there?
I think it was really powerful for a parent to sit down with someone who was sharing information. We were careful not to tell the parents what to do. We didn't say, go home and do this. We said, well, here's some recordings of you interacting with your baby. And here's what you sound like. And here's the baby. And the baby's kind of gurgling away and doing ba, ba, ba. And we get uniform the same questions. Is that me? I'm using this high pitch. Am I supposed to be doing that? We'd say, yeah, our studies say that is a good thing. That's called Parentese or Motherese. And they go, oh, it sounds so strange, And then we said, yes, it's natural. You're not doing it on purpose. It's just coming out of you. You're trying to engage your baby, and it happens kind of universally across languages. And it seems to be a good thing. And then we'd say, here's where you are on the distribution of all parents who, like you, have kids at this age. And so you're either a wild user of Parentese, you're a little user of Parentese, you're kind of in the middle. And we'd send them home armed with that information. It's like we were giving them a Fitbit. When someone gives you a recording of your steps and you're supposed to have 10,000, they say 10,000 is good. And you look at your steps like me on a Zoom day and I go, oh my gosh, I'm at 1,500 steps. This is bad. You start running up and down steps, or you try to go outside in rainy Seattle. But it does something to you. And I think that's what we did to parents. It was social. They could ask any question they wanted. It was not a machine giving them a response. We were just communicating. The brain's really important. You're the best thing going for the baby brain. There's a kind of talk that seems to boost language. And here's where you are on that metric. And we send them home. We tell them that at 6 months, we send them home and they come back 4 months later. Lo and behold, the recording at that time point says they're using it a lot more. So yeah, I would think that the social nature of this made it more potent. Now, of course, our funders ask us, well, can we mechanize this? I mean, is there a way we could give this to everybody? And I go, well, I understand the goal. It would be lovely to give this to everybody, but how are you going to do it? And it does take away that social communicative, you're sharing with another parent. Our coach was herself a parent. And so it was very easy to communicate this stuff. It's like parenting practices are often shared and it's helpful. So yeah, I think it's similar.
There's another question sort of related to that in terms of the parent. Does it matter whether the caregiver is a father or a mother?
It doesn't. We recorded both fathers and mothers, and only I've got a male student who just couldn't believe that men would, increase their pitch to that same degree. So of course, what did I do? I sent him to the recordings to separate male and female voices and just do the analytics on both voices. And in the study, we take any adult in the home, because sometimes grandmother is there, and count all adults talking to the baby. What's the prevalence of Parentese? And but what he's doing now is looking at both fathers and mothers, and he can verify that men, he's surprised, delighted, the men are actually doing it. And he's his latest, he's looking just at the 10-monthers now, but he brought me data this week showing that if you look at the percentage increase of a woman from adult directed standard speech to infant directed, and then you look at the men's from standard to infant directed, the men are actually increasing more. They make a 1.39% increase percentage wise. And and the mothers are doing 1.09. So it's like mothers are kind of doubling, but fathers are going beyond that. And so we'll see if that holds up. But he was tremendously intrigued. And so, yes, I think getting fathers into the picture, we invited both parents to come to the coaching. Most often it was the mothers, but the fathers, when they did come, were very interested. And it tended to produce more fathers talking to their kids at home. And of course, I have to say that on balance, if you look at the preponderance of fathers speaking to the babies or mothers speaking to the babies, 3/4 of the time it's the mothers. Even though we recorded on weekends, exactly to get as many different adults as possible living in the home. But it looks as though when they do speak to them, they are doing it. And that's kind of fun.
That is just one more reason we need dads involved, right?
We need dads involved. We need fatheries. We made an infographic to advertise fathers interacting with their children. And we got a lot of response on social media to it because we were highlighting fathers. And everybody was sort of like, well, everybody, why are you highlighting fathers? And we said, well, because many times that's the missing element. You know, we want to highlight fathers.
So powerful. We have another question here about the Madrid experiment. She said, did the Madrid experiences with infants from homes with less literate parents track parents' interaction with their children?
No, and I would do anything to get that. We didn't have any ability to have, we had the audio recorders on the kids every 2 weeks, but we didn't have permission to go into the homes to do any video, to do any audio. I would have loved to have done that, because what we did note is that parents would come back to the directors of the neighborhood schools and say, can I have that song they're doing in school? My child is coming home singing this song. I don't know this song. I would like this song. Can I have this book? And of course, it was an experiment. So we said we couldn't at the time, but then at the end of the experiment, we gave the parents books and songs and all kinds of things. Now, what happened the songs could be used. The directors told us that the parents who were illiterate were truly illiterate. They signed with an X. They had no ability to write. So that meant they had probably no ability to read. So watching these little kids respond to books was really fun. We have some recordings, little bits of video in the classrooms showing these kids coming to sit beside a tutor reading from a book and really curious about books, about seeing an object in the world and then seeing it in the book and kind of recognizing this book, these black lines on this white page are sort of related to this object in the world. Like there's a ball here and there's a picture of a ball there. And I think it was like an aha moment about what it means to have an idea in a book, to take the world of ideas and words and put them on paper and have someone read you a story. They seemed more curious than the kids who would have, books are routine. So it just looked like a world of opportunity, right? To continue. We're working on Sparkling to try to improve it as a platform that could be accessible to teachers everywhere. We have a lot of work to do. That we have these 2 experiments done and published, and we're trying to get more work done, and particularly in the United States with dual language learners. You know, when you look at the statistics on DLLs in America, right now, I think we're at about 26% of the population under the age of 8. No, maybe it's up to 35. And by 2030, in states like California, 50% of the children will be learning a language other than English at home and heading into our schools greatly disadvantaged, not because they're not smart, but because they don't have that communicative tool. And so our newest iteration of Sparkling has both Spanish and English, and the design is to switch from week to week. So in a 32-week school year, you do a week of English for an hour a day, then a week of Spanish, the same kind of games, two to build both languages, to give kids the true bilingual advantage, which is social and economic and health and cognitive, with better executive function skills. So we want to boost both languages in the dual language learners. And those experiments are still awaiting more work on the software and then funding to really get probably into Oregon and California to begin a dual language learning tests, and probably with 3 to 5 year olds, because in America, we don't have our 0 to 3 year olds. Wish we did have neighborhood schools where all 0 to 3 year olds could go. At age 3, it's mandatory in Spain. But 0 to 3, you pay what you can, and food is mealtime is such a respected tradition that all the children, whether they're in high chairs or baby seats or eventually chairs, they have mealtime. They all gather. It's really wonderful. It's wonderful.
It feels very Reggio, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So I guess you sort of got to this question a little bit, but are there other implications if we're doing the intervention for the littles, the birth to twos? Are there implications for the 3-year-olds and up, even if we can't get to them?
Yeah, we think so, because if you look at our data now, you can see that the 3-year-olds, the utterance rates in the 3-year-olds were astounding, and their learning rates were really excellent. We've now done a little more analyses on so we had these Lena recordings on them every 2 weeks. So we've now measured the syntax, and the kids who are in that 2 to 3 year age range are doing beautifully in adopting syntactic structures of English. And so there's evidence that there's no slowing down of learning in that period. So the fact that in America, getting the 0 to 3s will be really hard. Getting the 3 to 5s, you want to know that they're still plastic enough that you're just going to do a really good job of those kids mastering completely both Spanish and English in readiness for school. So that's our hypothesis. That's our belief and hope. And so, yeah, that I think we've got some reason for hope coming from the data that we haven't got published yet, but that we're continuing to mine.
And this is a little bit related to the ESL bilingual competencies that we're developing in Illinois. Are there some implications in terms of what competencies we want to make sure our workforce is leaving us with in order to be able to continue this work?
I love what you're doing in Illinois. I really think that tying this early period to success in the workplace is exactly what you need to do, because this question of bilingualism and the world's preparation to be as global as we're not getting less global, we're getting more global. The more dependence we have on other countries, the more important it is that we can communicate in other languages, that we're able to be flexible learners. You want that cognitive advantage. That the tests on the kids showing that even at 11 months, I didn't have time to show those today, but you've got 11-monthers who, bilingual 11-monthers are more flexible. If you have them play a game where they put little toys in little boxes and big toys in big boxes, and midway through you switch and have them put the little toys in the big boxes, it's just like a classic executive function test for adults. And the bilingual kids are so much significantly, but hugely better than the monolingual kids. Everyone solves the problem the first time. They put the toys in the right box. But when you switch it, the monolingual kids, like a lot of us, you just keep going back to the routine that worked before. They keep trying to do it the wrong way. They put the little ones in the little box. They can't break that habit. The bilingual kids are better at breaking that habit and switching the rule at 11 months. So the workforce of the future, we need communication skills, we need mental flexibility. And I frankly don't care if software allows me to communicate with you in, some exotic language, so I don't have to do it myself. I'd rather do it myself. I'd rather we teach kids to have at least one other language in their arsenal because of their economic viability, because of the cognitive benefits, because of the health benefits. It avoids Alzheimer's. So bilingual stretches the prefrontal cortex. So you cognitively age more slowly. You have less diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So you've got social, you've got economic, you've got cognitive, and you've got health benefits. What's not to like? And so what you're doing to link these early competencies to the later workforce, whether that's to increase language skills generally or to increase bilingual skills, it is a kind of magic bullet, I think. There's evidence that it is a very, very good approach that business leaders and governments should pay attention to.
Well, and I know some of your NIH work has focused on policy issues, and there's a couple questions in here around policy issues about with your findings, can we emphasize these benefits for dual language classrooms, from diverse classrooms? Can we do something from a policy perspective? Anything else?
I think that we've got a government that's now listening. We'll see how much they can accomplish, but first you have to have a government that's listening. And I think that given the questions that they're asking, given the legislation that they're formulating, given the talk that they're, when you look at the Biden plan, the stimulus plan, where is he putting bullets? Well, many, many places, but education and early education. I think the science has made a difference. And that's why I took so much time to advertise the National Academy of Sciences brief that really did declare from the highest scientific group in the country that a quality early education pays lifelong benefits. And so the more that message gets out there and the more we can study further. So what about a bilingual early education? What about an education that emphasizes this in the early period and that in the social emotional in the early period? These things are all linked. And so we will have a better, healthier, smarter, more flexible citizenry if we spend our money and time in the first 5 years. So I think the policy stuff is real, that we should vote with these questions in mind, that we should encourage. I'm doing everything I can to help the Biden administration with any knowledge I can supply, arguments, data, to support what it is they're trying to do. But I'm highly encouraged right now by what I'm seeing. And of course, it has to get through Congress. We still are not there yet. But step one is to have legislation, leaders that value this work with kids and these changes that can change the trajectory of children's lives forever. They have to value it and then create legislation. And then we have to hope and press in whatever ways we can to bring it about.
Well, we feel better having you there at the table. I will guarantee you that. And I'm sorry, we are not going to get to all of the questions. There's another one that I think we should continue to think about is how do we continue to share this work? How do we make bridges with from the university perspective out to the public and back and forth? I think that's there's a whole nother area that we all at the faculty folks, we need to continue this conversation. And I know Dr. Kuhl has to go. So I want to thank you for energizing us and to continue supporting us in our missions, for advocating for young children and for the importance of what we do and what you do every day. And thank you for nurturing us as learners. And we look forward to continuing learning from you and with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I love the work and I love communicating it. That's what we all need to do.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh my goodness. All right. Teresa, can you, well, we'll leave this on. Well, I think I think we have a lot of wonderful opportunities, I think, in terms of thinking about how this connects to our ESL bilingual credential that I want to talk about a little bit. I think it also helps us understand some possible advocacy actions, and thinking about how we might, because we know that Governor Pritzker is very supportive of higher education, very supportive of early childhood education. So I think some of this research would be very powerful for us to be able to be sharing widely and often with as many audiences as we can. And I think also that when we're thinking about the whole notion of dual language and thinking about, our infant toddler programs where we haven't spent as much time thinking about dual language development yet. We know that a huge portion of our birth to 5 kiddos in Illinois are coming from dual language contexts, just as that's true nationally. I think all of these pieces are swirling around in my head about, I see a lot of possible action items, and I'm not quite sure where they go, but I think they give us a lot to think about. Joni, you look like you were going to say something. No? Oh, okay. I think I would love personally to see a little bit more about, the Parentese coaching and seeing if we could get a little bit more information about, and work with Dr. Kuhl about, what can maybe we can find some sites in Illinois to do something like that. So I'm dreaming right now. I'm dreaming, but I think the implications of this work for how important birth to 3 infant toddler work is it parallels what's happening in our state in terms of investing at the state level in birth to 2 programs, and the issues around mental health and the social brain reinforces everything we're doing with the pyramid model and with infant mental health specialists. Like, all of these pieces are connecting in my head. I hope they're connecting in yours. And I hope that this presentation has given you a little energy and a little space to imagine and dream and think about what we might be able to do, especially for young dual language learners. And so I want to do a little commercial, I guess, and connect this with some of the work that we're doing in Illinois right now. So if you could, yes, thank you, Teresa. In the Dropbox, if you had the Dropbox or if you got it mailed to you, there is a copy of this document that we developed that sort of describes the alignment of the basic existing ECE competencies and how they align with the new proposed bilingual ESL competencies. So in doing this work, we started with the ESL, or we started with the ECE competencies, and what we discovered, that isn't too surprising, I guess, but we discovered very happily that there was a wealth of good foundational information in terms of ECE competencies that related to language, culture, and differing abilities. That was really baked into a lot of those existing ECE competencies. So when we took a look at those existing ECE competencies, it was easy to build off of many of them to go deeper, to think about if I was going to be a specialist and have specialized knowledge around ESL and bilingualism, what would I need to do to be able to get a little deeper? Now, there were some, admittedly, that weren't in existence for the ECE under the existing ECE competencies. And so we made some up, like you can see here on CPD 3, this one was identifies features of various classroom language models, so that we have we have transitional programs of instructions, we have bilingual, we have two-way dual, we have one-way dual, we have all that those different kinds of models, which is very specific to our ESL bilingual competencies. But others, like CPD 3, where we are talking about planning and implementing learning experiences, we're just taking it to a different and a deeper level that gets into children's funds of knowledge that are more connected to their culture and more culturally relevant, and very intentional in thinking about language and the use of language or languages within this introducing new learning experiences. What are you doing in English? What are you doing in home language? And then there were some also that there was an existing ECE competency that we thought was just dandy the way it was, and we didn't need to go deeper into that in terms of the ESL bilingual competencies. So this is a handout that is in your packet, as I mentioned. And we will be tomorrow, Sergio Hernandez and Dr. Luisiana Melendez and I will be doing a deeper dive into this if you're interested. But we certainly would be very open to you, to any comments, questions, queries you have related to this. We're still very much in the piloting phase of this work, and would be happy to hear from you if you have some feedback for us related to these competencies. They're just proposed, it's draft, we're very much in a pilot stage. So feel free to share if you have some other ideas. I also wanted to mention, while I had you as a captive audience, which is that I think most all of you know that there is such a thing as an ESL bilingual toolbox. I still have trouble finding it. I don't know why. So I put this slide up to remind myself and to remind you where you can find it. It's on the Gateways site, obviously, under professional development. And then you can see the ESL bilingual toolbox is there. And the next slide, if you will show you what you find when you get into that toolbox. And so you can see that it is designed so that the resources are aligned per competency. And we tried to sort of categorize the resources based on what kinds of materials they were. So we tried to find a lot of videos, since we know those will be useful for the modularization project, but they're also useful for your in-class work. Some of them are very short, some of them are a little bit longer, but there's a lot of examples there of kids using dual language, which they're very hard to find, that we know. The second group is really about sort of more extended webinars that might be an hour long, or modules that might take a half an hour that you could embed into your coursework, or even professional development, and that are aligned with particular competencies. If you're finding that some of your students are missing particular competencies, it might be an interesting way to again think about how we use this in a flexible system. The third column is we tried to just, there's a lot of like little short tip sheets or examples of how-tos or shorter blog posts that students may want to follow. The work from New America, there is so much information, so many resources in the ESL toolbox around the materials from New America. They're churning out something new every day. And so these are sort of more practical, generally speaking, and hands-on. And then the last column, we put, this is more academic stuff, papers or resources that would be more resources for you as instructors, as teachers, to build your background knowledge, or if you were working with, people that had a particular research interest, you could certainly take a look at that information. And we tried to make it broad enough so that we give a little bit of support across the whole realm of things that we need as when we're teaching a course, or doing professional development too, I guess would be true. Let's see. All right, I think I will end on that note and turn it back over to Joni to close us out for the day. Thank you.
Pat, thank you so much. And that was a wonderful presentation from Dr. Kuhl. And thank you for all the connecting the dots that you have done for us as well. Greatly appreciate it. Right. We're going to actually be able to release everybody about 15 minutes early today. Wahoo, right? So if you can hang in with us for about 3 more minutes, we're going to be done here. We're doing a wrap right now. We really look forward tomorrow to having everyone join us. Remember, there's a pre-conference session kind of on mindfulness at 8 a.m., which everyone is welcome to join in. But the forum itself will formally launch around 9 a.m. We're going to start with those peer-reviewed workshops tomorrow, 2 different sets of interest sessions that you can choose from. We'll go over in more detail tomorrow how to move you in and out of those interest sessions. Then we're going to have a faculty showcase where you get to hear from the faculty who are piloting the ECE credential competency modules. And then we're going to close out our day with Dr. Jamila Jordan. What a wonderful way to end our day with her tomorrow. We're sure you will appreciate hearing all that she has to share. I really want you to mull this over tonight. Please think about this. I just can't emphasize enough that we really believe there's going to be some unprecedented funding brought to the state of Illinois, available to early care and education workforce members who want to clinch associate and bachelor degrees. What would it take? What's needed? Really trying to capture as much input as possible in terms of what would be needed to really make this happen. Such an opportunity. And then I want you to mark your calendars, if you would please, the virtual conversations that we've been having on a quarterly basis. The next one is May 3rd at 8 a.m. And I imagine in that virtual conversation, we will pick up some of the very ideas that people have proposed for using funding to advance degrees and credentials. Some of the ideas that our state panel speakers have brought forward may be discussed further. So please make sure your calendar is marked for that so that you can join it. Teresa, what else would you like to share in anticipation of tomorrow?
I would also like to share that tomorrow will be a Zoom meeting, so you will not have to re-register. As you can just click the link and we'll send that out and make sure you have it. It's more of an interactive day. So again, it's a regular Zoom meeting where you'll be able to turn your cameras on. Just thought I'd give you a heads up. You can turn your cameras on so you can be prepared for that. And we're looking forward to those intercessions and pilot schools, Joni, and everything that you mentioned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow for Embracing Change and Transformation Day 2, Gateways Forum. See ya. Thank you.